Welcome to The Lumber Word, where industry veterans Matt Beamer, Greg Riley, and Ashley Buckhold dissect the world of commodity lumber each week. We bring you up-to-date insights on supply, demand, and market trends, sharing our trading expertise to benefit everyone in the supply chain. Join us for informative and entertaining discussions that guarantee to make you wiser about all things lumber.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode, number 85 of The Lumber Word. We're recording it on the 24th of July, 2024. Got a great reoccurring guest, Brian Wesbury from First Trust Advisors. Greg, I'll let you introduce Brian.
Hey, Brian, awesome to have you back. Thanks so much for making the time. I know you got a busy schedule just coming back from, your whirlwind European vacation.
Yes. Yeah, well, it was a little bit of vacation, a little bit of work. Hillsdale College.
We call that a workation.
A workation, yeah. Hillsdale College, who, by the way, I am now a member of the Board of Trustees. For the past, 7 months ago, I said yes and went to my first meeting. But I said yes to this cruise. So, you get them from your alma mater all the time. We're going to do a cruise of the Mediterranean, and, it's for the alumni and the donors, et cetera. And then they'll have some speakers. So on this cruise, I was one of the speakers, along with Victor Davis Hanson, Caroline Glick, and a guy named Jeffrey Lord. It was a blast. I had fun speaking. I had fun listening to all the other speakers. But when I was a kid, I don't know about you guys. I don't know what fascinated you, but we would get National Geographic. I never threw them or thumbed to death. But one was the Alaska earthquake, and this happened in the 60s something, and they had pictures. I was always fascinated by it. And then the other one was Pompeii, and how a whole village, a city of 10,000 people could be just wiped out and frozen in time. And I couldn't get rid of that magazine. I'd look at it. Well, I've always wanted to go there ever since I was in 6th grade or whatever. And I got to go. It's a really, what a cool trip that was. And so anyway, we had a great cruise. I got back less than 24 hours ago. So if I have any Biden moments, it's jet lag. It's not.
Well,
are you really there?
There was a lot happened while you were gone. We digress a little bit in that, but we've just recently had a bunch of housing data, existing homes yesterday, new homes today. Maybe you can give us your take on the housing market and your outlook for the rest of the year.
Yeah, just to go back what you said, a lot happened while I was gone. It was kind of wild, So Hillsdale College is, they're the one school, well, I guess there's a couple, but they're the most famous that takes not a dime of federal money. All right. And so they are truly free. It's like being a private company, not a public company. And what I'm saying is that the people that were on this cruise, the supporters of Hillsdale, I was surrounded by conservatives, and as we got this news, it was, you just go to the bar, go to the speech, go to dinner, and it's just like everybody's the same as you, and it was really fun. It was like probably not your average cruise, but we can come back to that. The second thing is that one of the topics that I had was about the size of our government, and I gave a big speech about it, but I closed it up with a little section on affordable housing. And maybe we'll go off on this tangent a little bit, but I want to say this. We hear all the time. I travel all over the country. I love to read local newspapers. I can't tell you how many hundreds, maybe thousands of stories I've seen in the newspapers around the country about affordable housing, how there's no affordable housing, how people can't afford housing, how we have to find ways to build affordable housing, on and on and on. And I started thinking about this, and there's two sides to that equation. Number one is how much do houses cost? All right, that's what most people think when they hear affordable housing. But the other side of it is, what about income? because you have to if you have high income, then you can afford an expensive house, so but if incomes are lowered, no wonder houses aren't affordable. And I look at it this way: government, federal government, state and local, plus all the cost of regulation, which clearly the building industry knows about. If you add it all up, it's 50% of everything we produce. So we have this GDP, and then the government takes 50% of it, and what's left, the other 50%, we have to use to buy houses. And so in other words, the real reason houses aren't affordable, if we wanted to talk about that, is because government takes half our income. No wonder we can't afford them. And then at the same time, they put all these regulations on building that make them cost more too. So it's a double whammy. But no one ever talks about incomes when they're talking about affordable housing. And so I really hit on that. And government has massively grown, really, well, for 90 years, but starting in '08, it ramped up, and then again in COVID. So every crisis, it gets bigger. And I'm now looking at these housing numbers, new home sales, existing home sales, housing starts. We're basically still at 2019 levels. In spite of everything that's happened, all the money the Fed's printed, all the government money the government's pumped into the economy, we basically have sales that are about 2019 levels. I kind of look at the housing market right now. It's had a tough few years, and then just recently, these last 12 months have not been good. Existing home sales are down, new home sales are down. Housing completions are way up. The number of completed homes on the market are, I don't know what the record high is, but it's a really high number. And so I would argue the housing market right now is in a really tough spot.
On the existing home side, you've got that whole lockup effect with people in 2 3/4% mortgages. And so they're not moving, although, we have seen inventory are starting to grow on existing homes. As more people come on the market. I mean, prices still haven't adjusted. We've got an interesting phenomenon right now where new home prices are actually lower than existing home prices.
Right.
And it's crazy when you get a report the existing home sales, the lowest level since 2010, and prices were up 6.1%, right?
Right. Yeah. I was going to bring that point up. I'm glad you really did. We think, now remember, I'm a macroeconomist. You guys know this world, from the inside way better than I do. But I'm looking at it as a macro guy, and I'm like, why are new home prices down and existing home prices up? And I believe the answer is because we're building smaller homes. So in other words, because the housing market's so tough, that builders are actually building less expensive homes. We've actually seen the price per square foot fall between 2022 and 2023, just only 1.1%. So it's not the majority of the price decline, but it's a little piece of it. I think the real thing is it's the mix of homes that we're building. And so that's on that side. On the existing home side, the way we measure these prices is we look at the sale of the same home if we can. This is the way Case-Shiller does their numbers. It's the way the Federal Home Loan FHFA do their numbers. They try to look at the sale of the same home over time, and those prices are up because we printed too much money and we had inflation. I think that's why you're seeing this dichotomy between new and existing. It's really because we're building the new stuff we're building. They're trying to get off the market, and they're either lowering prices, number one, but number two, just build the mix of homes. There's more smaller, cheaper homes than more expensive ones.
We're definitely noticing that, Brian, in the product mix. Yards are taken, and just the feedback. I saw one of the big builders in Fort Worth launched a subdivision a month ago. 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 950 square feet without a garage. Yep. Price on it, I don't know exactly what it was, but I was like, wow, that's a lot of money for a pretty small house. Right.
My wife loves that show on HGTV, Tiny Houses. She loves that. You know,
Yeah.
she watches that and the stuff on Magnolia Network, you know, HGTV, you know, House Flippers, all that stuff. Loves it.
It's much different from MTV Cribs back in the 90s.
Yeah. Yes. But by the way,
Brian,
go ahead.
I was reading your data watch from the June housing starts, and it said the rise in June was entirely due. This is a question, and me interrupt you there. Multifamily.
Yep.
And Greg's been pushing this, and Greg's been saying maybe one of the biggest surprises is going to be at the end of 2024. Multifamily is off the bottom and trending maybe in a more positive light. So you said it was up. What do you see in multifamily going forward?
Yeah, I think this is where immigration is coming in, right? Because I think we overbuilt during COVID, you know, rental homes and everybody, you know, who knows how many BlackRock bought and all that kind of stuff. And then it peaked and it fell. And I think it's going to bounce back. And I think immigration has a bunch to do with that. We have, you know, people moving to new cities that they've never lived in before. And they're immigrants. Maybe they can't afford a house anyway. But the bottom line is they're going to be looking to rent. And so I don't know what kind of multifamily we're building, but it's probably on in that rental market a lot, way lower end too, just like the houses. So, you know, that's I would just throw that in there. Again, this is looking.
We constantly get this, you know, kind of mantra that people are like, we're underbuilt. We're underbuilt. You know, I mean, the guy was on CNBC today and said, you know, he called it the GFC. Since the GFC, back in 2008, you know, between 2008 and 2020, you know, we massively underbuilt. Do you know, like, I don't know if you guys have any modeling where you go, well, this is kind of the equilibrium number that we need to be building. And, you know, for the last 10 years, we underbuilt it by X, or we built it by Y. Do you have that data?
Yep, we do. And I wish I could tell you the exact number. We haven't written that. We write these Monday morning outlooks, and every once in a while we'll publish that number. But the way, you know, if you look at it, right, we have population growth, we have fires, disasters, hurricanes, and then we just have old houses that you get torn down. And when you add all of that up, the number, it's about 1.5 million. It may be a little higher than that. And we haven't built that many. If you look back at the last, since the GFC, I love that. We have not built 1.5 million a year. And one of the things we do see is the number of people per household is going up. So they're, you know, and you might, I'm not trying to be like pigeonhole somebody, but if you think about immigrant families, oftentimes they live a bunch of people together while they're trying to figure everything out. And maybe that's one of the things that's going on.
Isn't that how the American dream starts? You know, you get up, you got a lot of people, you take care of your family, you work really hard, you know, and then the next generation does better. And then the next generation, you know, ends up running for Congress.
Yes, exactly. By the way, that's a whole different aside. See, here's one of the problems we have with our economy right now. I just read this story, and believe it or not, Governor Hochul of New York is the one that's like up in arms about this. But in New York State, there are ads all over the place that you can get paid $37 an hour to stay at home and take care of grandma. And so what's happening is that Medicaid is now paying people to take care of their family members, which is what you just, you know, that's the way a family starts. And, you know, we always think we're supposed to take care of them, but we don't expect to get paid from the government to do it. But all the job growth, or a vast majority of the job growth, I got to be careful, I sound like Trump, everyone, like, you know, but like a vast majority of the job growth in New York State is these government jobs of people staying at home taking care of family members, and they figured out a way. It's full of fraud, it's full of everything, but that's where all this government spending is going. So once you put a program like that in place, you tell everybody it's going to cost us $80 billion a year. And then everybody figures out, holy crud, I don't have to work. I can stay home with grandma and I get paid $37 an hour. And the next thing you know, instead of 80 billion a year, it costs 180 billion a year. And that's what's going on. We're actually paying people now. And it's actually the reason Catherine Hochul, the Governor Hochul, was all this is breaking the bank because the state pays it in New York State. It's we're seeing I believe the data on the economy. If you look at it, inventories are up, housing is down. Richmond Fed, Philadelphia Fed. All these regional indices are down. Retail sales are only up 0.2% this year, and that's with inflation. I think the job numbers are inflated. I still believe we're going to have a recession. And I know we haven't seen it yet, but I think that's one of the housing is a leading indicator, and I think it might be showing us a little bit of that. I don't know what's going on with lumber prices.
The stock market, like is fading you. I mean, well, not today. Yeah. Today it's having a little trouble today, but it is it's consistently been tracking higher in face of all this stuff. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, my theory, I've said it with you before, is that COVID was a car wreck. We had a car wreck. We broke our leg in 4 places. The ambulance showed up. We're in agony. They pump us full of morphine. And then they take you to the emergency room and the doc says, hey, how you feeling? And you go, man, I've never felt better. And they have to remind you that you're high on morphine and you can't feel anything. And that's what I think, this stock market, first of all, it reminds me a lot of the late 90s. Not the same. I don't want to get into why I sound stupid when I say that. It just reminds me, it's a small group of stocks. Everybody says AI means we're never going to have a recession again, all that stuff. It just reminds me of that, but it also makes people, it's like morphine. It's like, well, see, everything's fine. And underneath it, we have money supply has declined in the last 2 years. It's only up 1% in the past year. Interest rates are normal now. They're not too low. They're not too high. And in other words, and at the same time, the deficits that we kept boosting, we're not going to have a higher deficit this year than we had last year. And so that means that stimulus that we had last year is kind of running out too. So you got money supply slow, deficits not increasing. You've got M2, you have interest rates normal. I don't think they're too high. I think they're normal. And you put all that together and it's a recipe. We never had the recession from the car wreck. And I think it's just because we morphined it over. And now the morphine's running out.
One of your newsletters, you talked about the money supply today versus, I don't know, 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
And it's like quadrupled or something.
Yeah,
you touch on that a little bit and what that means to the layman.
Yeah. And also, Brian, I read on your Twitter, as Matt said too, where they're actually putting a lot of this cash in places that it normally has never been at before.
Yeah. One thing, so a couple of quick comments. Number one, supposedly COVID affected the poor more than the rich. And so we had to do everything to help inequality, right? Well, all this money printing and spending, all it did was help the rich because the rich own houses and the rich own equities and everything went through the roof. So that's number one. It backfired, just like everything government does. All right. But then to the second point directly to this, how does this impact things? Well, we had this inflation. We printed 40% more money. So what that means to me is that therefore, for example, really everything would be 40% higher than otherwise. And so I get it. In Naples, house prices were up 200%. But if you look across the country, house prices are up about 40%. And I would argue that's a permanently higher price. That's why we're not going to have a collapse in housing prices. Nonetheless, it made houses less affordable, so they have to build smaller houses, and that's why we get this discrepancy. But now we've absorbed it all. And once you've absorbed it, then the question is, what about money supply growth from here on, or where we are today? And it's really slow. It's up only 1% from a year ago. And when you go from 40% growth to only 1, I mean, that's like, if you're driving your car 100 miles an hour and you slow down to 1 mile an hour in 4 feet, you're going through the windshield. And that's what worries me about this, because we printed so much money and jammed so much into the economy. That's where all the inflation came from. And now we just stopped it.
How do you fix that? Is
Yeah.
there a way to fix it? Or
Reagan had
is
to
the
take on
only
a big
answer you
problem.
need to go through a lot of pain?
Yeah.
Which politically we're not, the country's not in a place that's willing to accept that pain. So that's what I struggle with is
The only way, I don't know who said Reagan and Volcker, but but that's the right answer.
Didn't we jack rates way up and just squeeze the government spending down and just force people to deal with reality? I'm not sure exactly. I was only 14 years old when that happened, so maybe you could expand on it.
Yeah, Matt, that's a great point. Actually, I'm going to make this point. Sorry, guys, it's technical a little bit. It's, but
we're going to get in the weeds here. Are we getting in the weeds?
A little
Inside
bit
baseball, right, baby? Let's go.
A little bit of the weeds. So, if you ask most people, how did we fix the inflation of the 70s? Well, it's Volcker jacked rates up. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. It is true that rates went up. But what Volcker really did is he said, we've been focused on rates way too much. We haven't focused on the money supply. And so what he did is he squeezed the reserves in the banks. And they went from like 10% reserves down to 9%. And if you have a 10% reserve requirement and there's only, and you're a bank and you got to go borrow enough to get to 10, and there's only 9 in the whole system, guess what happens? That's a shortage. That's a squeeze. That's a hunt squeeze on silver, or I don't know who does it in the lumber world, but that's why rates
we love a squeeze on lumber right now.
Yeah, that's why rates went to 20%, because he squeezed money. And then it's the squeezing the money that fixed the inflation. So when Greg says, how do we fix it? I would go back to the gold standard. But the way if you take the system as we have it now and you go, it's all screwed up and they don't know what they're doing, or how do they fix the problem that they created? What they really need to do is go back and just run policies that let the money supply grow like 5% a year, 6% a year, and then we end up with 2% inflation. And then that's how you get back to kind of normal. But it won't go fix the inflation. All prices, the price of pizza, the price of a McDonald's Big Mac, and the price of a house, everything.
Prices are never going back to where they were. They're at this higher level, and it's just a question of, do they just go up a little bit from here over time, but they're not going back.
Yeah, exactly. Prices are not, I hate it when politicians say we're going down. Well, no, inflation's lower, but those prices aren't going lower. And they're permanently higher, and wages.
The only group of people that would say it's if you spend more money that you're investing. Well, no, you're just spending. You're not investing.
Right.
They're permanently higher, except for lumber.
Yeah. Well, and that is true. So what happens is certain prices go up and down because of supply and demand issues in those markets, and it's not always I always use gas. Putin did not cause inflation. Now, Putin did cause oil prices to go higher than they would have been without Putin invading Ukraine, right? And natural gas for a little while too. But eventually that corrects. But if you have to pay more to fill up your car, that means you have less to spend on something else. And that means the price of that goes down eventually, but it doesn't happen immediately. So therefore the CPI, one thing we have to realize is this consumer price index, the CPI, it's just a measure of prices. It's not actual inflation. Inflation is the money supply. That's what it is. And then we try to measure it by looking at the price of Big Macs, cars, houses, lumber, all that stuff. And so all of them go like this. They're always moving differently. It surprised me. Lumber went so high, but you guys can tell me, is it come back so much just because so much more production went online?
Well, like the interesting thing was during that time period, everyone said that there were shortages of things. The one thing there was never any shortage of, lumber because we allocated supply to the people that wanted it. So anybody that wanted lumber could get as much as they wanted. Then that's why we bid the price so high, and that's why there was so much volatility, and then it came back down, and I went back up. Whereas lots of other products were on quote unquote allocation. And, certain people could get it. Certain people could get all they wanted. Certain people could get some of what they wanted. And some people got none of what they wanted.
Right.
It's interesting because like those prices went up much more slowly through that process. And now they are permanently at that higher price, very sticky, not coming down, where lumber prices now are at, pre-pandemic lows. We're back down. Matt, what do you say? Early 2010s, not quite the lows of the GFC, but I mean, I guess adjusted for inflation, we're probably at all-time lows right now.
Well, adjusted for inflation, we're back in the 70s on some items, probably like pine.
We could be actually at zero.
I think, Brian, part of the answer to your question, original question about did we outproduce the thing? The answer bluntly is yes. Never underestimate the mill's ability to outproduce a market or a good market for that matter. But not only did the mills invest a lot of these windfall profits into optimization and increasing their efficiencies, or even just upgrading old sawmill technology, then we had a bit more European lumber coming in too. So, and then combine that all with a growth in production volume of yellow pine. So yellow pine has been by far the most profitable mill area of growth. The logs down there are just cheaper. The labor prices are cheaper. If you're selling lumber at $400, all other things being equal, the yellow pine mills make the most money at $400.
Yeah.
And so yellow pine production is way up over the last 5-10 years, both new mills that they built and also revitalizing older mills that just got an influx of cash, right? So for sure, our production in North America and then the import lumber is a good number. It's a good, healthy number. At the same time, the frenzy of the lumber market is completely gone. So when you don't have people chasing lumber around every day, like frantically trying to find it, this is what happens. You go into the dreaded flat market or downward trending market over a period of time, depending on how much production is perceived to be out there in the world. And right now we're shaking out we're just clearing up distribution inventories and mill inventories. And eventually we're going to wake up someday here in the future and we'll just realize that there's a lot of no quotes out there and a lot of the things that we took for granted for a year are changed. But we're still in the hey, let's get rid of this stage, right? That's where we are right now.
So Brian, you said something before when you were talking about interest rates, because obviously that's like everybody's always worried about, like, wanting to know about interest. And you said, hey, I think interest rates are like just normal right here. I guess two-part question is that if your macro view is that we're going to have a recession, what would you expect that interest rates would do with that?
Yeah. So when I say normal, I'll just explain what I mean. If you look at all the measures of inflation, and there are like 50 of them out there, and most people pay attention to the CPI, PPI, but we have all kinds of others. Cleveland, median, Fed, and our median price index, all this stuff. I'm going to say inflation's about 3.5. Okay. 3 to 3.5. And then you add 1. And I believe interest rates ought to be inflation plus 1 if you're talking treasuries kind of thing. Mortgages, inflation plus 2. All right.
So that's a short-term interest rate, right?
Right. Actually, yeah, right.
Funds.
But if you told me inflation's going to be 3.5 over the next 10 years, I would say the 10-year ought to be 3.5 plus 1, 3.5 plus 1.5. Yeah. So it goes for any rate. But we don't know what inflation is going to be in 8 years or 7 years or 6 years. But so anyway, where I'm getting is 3.5 plus 1 plus 1.5 is 4.5, 5. Fed funds is 5.4. The 10-year is 4.2. I mean, we're right there. I mean, you could argue Fed funds is a little high. You could argue 10 years a little low. Like we could argue all day about these things, but it's pretty close. Now, I also think that we're likely to get a recession. I also think the Fed's been tight enough with the money supply that inflation is going to head back toward that too, and so they'll cut rates, and that's why the 10 years come back from we were at 5 or close to it, and now we're down to close to 4. So my belief is that's probably going to help the housing market when those rates come down. And so, but I say right now today, so my advice, again, I'm not, a housing market advisor. I'm a macro guy. Most of the people I talk to are financial advisors. And for the past year, and ever since the Fed got rates over 5 and inflation fell into that 3.5 area, I've been saying fixed income is you ought to, I mean, that 60-40 model everybody's always talking about, 60 equities, 40 bonds. I'm like, that makes sense now. It's like you ought to be putting clients at least partly in some fixed income because it's not expensive anymore. It's about right. And so it sort of makes sense. That's what I mean. Now they're going to cut rates.
What kind of money would you, sorry, Brian, what kind of money would you expect to get on a return on buying bonds right now if you're like a senior on a fixed income?
Yeah, munis. I mean, you're going to get a 4.5. It depends on what you buy. I've seen high yield, like closed end funds that are 8, 7, 8, 9, 10% underneath their NAV, yielding 10.5%. And I think we're going to have a recession, but it's not 2008. It's not 2000. And so I don't think the risk from credit is that high. I think stocks go down, but 15-20% maybe. That's about it. So
they kind of go back to where they were like last year this time.
Yeah, that's sort of what I think. And so what I would argue is that you can get closed-end fund of high-yield debt is risky, but you're getting 10.5, and I don't think it's as risky.
That's because they're levered, right?
Yeah, they're levered a little, plus they're selling under their NAV, and right. Because that's what closed-end funds do. So I mean, anyway, that's that side. So I would argue today, Bill Dudley, who, just to remind everybody who that is, he used to be the chief economist at Goldman Sachs. Just like everybody at Goldman Sachs, he left and went to work for the Fed, became the president of the New York Fed, and now he's retired and probably, gosh knows how much he's worth, and he writes for Bloomberg and just probably as a hobby. And he said today that he always thought he was always in the higher for longer camp, but he's worried and that he thinks the Fed, in order to get in front of the curve, has to start cutting rates. And I think we're gonna hear more of that. And I don't think he's wrong. I think we're going to see weaker economic data and some lower overall inflation numbers. And so we're probably going to see some rate cuts, and that'll be good for the housing market. It will, but it won't be enough to stop a recession. I think they're too late. And if somehow they're able to print their way out of a recession, it kind of will drive me crazy. Because
won't that just create a snapback of inflation?
It can. Yeah, it depends on what they do with them too.
That's how you try to get out of it. Because to your point, when you started with this, there's two sides. We've been talking a lot about monetary policy, which I love to talk about. There's the other side of it, in which you started with, which is the fiscal policy.
Yep.
How the government is and what it does to constrain economic activity.
Yep.
And unless I'm missing something, I don't see anything on the horizon. Obviously, the government right now is on, autopilot. Some unelected people are in charge. We don't know who they are. We don't know what much about them. But neither candidate has any pro-growth ideas.
Yeah.
I could argue that, one candidate may be better because they have a tendency based on their prior administration to cut regulations. And I could argue that the other one, based on their history, makes Bernie Sanders seem very centrist. My eyes, Brian.
Yep, exactly. You've hit on it. Actually, I'm going to tell you, I've been more frustrated in the last 10 years than my entire career. I'm a libertarian at heart. I want smaller government, so I've been frustrated a lot, but I mean really frustrated because all we talk about is government anymore. When Sports Illustrated and ESPN and the Weather Channel talk about politics, we got too big of a government. It's like this is, and then we've all turned into Keynesians, right? What's the government going to do with fiscal policy? What's the Fed going to do with interest rates? And then that determines exactly where, what the future is going to hold. And will we get a soft landing, which we kind of talked about already? They might get away with this. They might, where the morphine goes away, but they have a new ultrasound massaging device that takes away the pain of your surgery and your broken leg. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah, it's called Percocet.
Yeah.
So it occurs to
one.
me, Brian, that one of the things you're talking about, if they do drop rates, that's not necessarily good for housing because that's going to unlock a lot of existing home.
Yep.
All of a sudden you'll see a new wave of inventory arrive on the market. People like me that have a 3% rate.
Yeah.
If they can sell at 5.5 or 5%,
right.
All of a sudden my house is viable again, right? I mean,
yep.
I don't want to sell my house, but you get the point, right? So you're going to see increased completions in the new housing sector, and those guys, as stock prices are doing pretty well the last couple of years, they're going to keep building. They have no reason not to. Meanwhile, you've got all these homes that are currently being occupied and no chance of hitting the market. They would hit the market. Some of those homes would hit the market. You'd have a glut of inventory. That doesn't necessarily bode well for lumber.
No, yeah, that's true. And I think it probably would. And it might not. We can go back and look at recessions. Housing has always tended to be a leading indicator, right? Durable goods and housing, like big ticket items, because they're sensitive to interest rates. But we've got ourselves in this real quandary because the Fed held rates too low for too long. And everybody thinks 0 is the right number. And it was never the right number. Yeah. By the way, the Fed has 400 PhD economists. And the best they could all come up with is, let's hold rates at 0. It's the most insane thing I've ever heard.
So Brian, we're not so everybody listening to this always asks the question. We're not in 2008. Housing right now is kind of stuck. So we're right at, what did it come out? 1.3, 1.4. So we all of a sudden, I saw July, everything related, the ITB and whenever there was a talk of rate cuts, the ITB and all the home builders rallied significantly in July. So where is housing going to go if we just have, or kind of go into some kind of recession? And I mean, are we going to build more? Are we going to build less? What's the thought out there for people that run lumber yards and truss plants right now, trying to project what's going on through the end of the year and into next year?
Yeah, I think, well, the good news is we're not 08, we're not 2000, we're not COVID crisis. It's like this is going to be a more normal recession. And partly, I mean, this is the knowledge that builders have. Is it hard to find workers because unemployment is so low? Because in a recession, unemployment will go up. And if we really do have a shortage of houses and interest rates come down, yeah, sure, existing inventory will come on the market. But if you sell your house that you got a 3% mortgage on, you got to find another one somewhere. And
Right.
population is going up by 3 million a year because of immigration. And so it's hard for me to see a collapse in housing. I mean, housing is, it's kind of like when you have a recession, but the market already priced it in. And so I can kind
Yeah.
of see where all these things leave housing in it's prepared to take advantage of lower rates and a better job market, or a more supply in the job market. But at the same time, we're going to have higher unemployment and a recession, which means there's some less demand for housing. So I would argue that it doesn't get crushed during a recession because it's already in a sense in the doldrums, and it may actually help it come out faster than it normally would when we look back at historical recessions. One of my biggest problems of forecasting today is that we have done unprecedented things. Like, I saw a tweet the other day. I'm ready for precedented times. Like, please give me some precedented times. I'm sick of this unprecedented stuff. And and so when it makes it harder to forecast because all these things are happening in ways that we've never seen before. But that's kind of supply of labor has obviously impacted the housing and the building trades. Interest rates have done that too, and prices have done it. The price shock and affordable housing has done it as well. But and so I can kind of see all of this coming together. Yeah, in a recession, housing isn't going to be awesome, but at the same time, it's already not awesome. So I don't think the bottom's far. I think it can bounce back pretty quickly. Maybe
So
it's
before
not
we
enough.
wrap things up, a couple of things I wanted to say. Ashley went out on X a week ago last Saturday and called the bottom in the lumber market. And I wanted to be here, today and kind of, confirm that, I'm not going to say that he nailed it just yet, but there's some green shoots that he may have.
Yeah.
And the other is you said something while you were away about Sand Hills, and I just want to say, yeah, I'm available. That
All right. Yeah, I need to find another member. I don't want to go with the same guy.
Oh, I have one question for you, Brian. Victor
Yeah.
David Hansen, like that guy's amazing when I listen to him talk on TV. I don't follow him enough. How is he to listen to and
what kind of guy is he?
Live? What is he like?
Guy's guy?
He is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He was a little under the weather. I think he had COVID. I can't believe he tested himself, if that's true, but nonetheless, he was a little sick. But he gave 2 speeches with 0 notes, literally gave the entire history of Napoleon, and then he gave the entire summary of his new book. The end. I forget the name of the book, but it's about war and annihilation, and he used some 3 historical examples. One of them is the Aztecs. They were just annihilated, and it kind of left you like, whoa, like maybe everybody ought to come up to the ranch in Colorado. And I have lots of ammo, but we
the
might
end of everything. How wars descend into something other.
Annihilation. And
are you gonna work on a new book, Brian, soon?
I will really, really want to, and so we'll see if I have a chance.
You have to not give 350 speeches a year.
Yeah,
to write a book.
Yeah, I used when I was 45, I could do 300 speeches a year and still write a book.
I think
not
if you
anymore.
go out to like the ranch and in just like write a killing somebody book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I need to write I do want to write another book. and I've got a couple of ideas, and we'll see what happens.
You should probably write a book about fly fishing the Deschutes River.
Yeah, there you go. Hey,
you're gonna need to do a lot of field work there to prep work for that.
I told you I fished both sides of that. The public.
I remember that conversation. That's why I was jabbing you that way. But you're privileged, buddy. There's not a lot of people that have fished both sides of the river.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Brian, we appreciate you coming back again. And for anybody that wants to sign up for your data watch that you send out a couple times, how often is it? Go to ftportfolios.com?
Yep, FT Portfolios. If you want the shortcut, it's FTPLP Limited Partnership, FTPLP.com. And then just over on you got to find my picture somewhere and click on it and like look for a little box where you put your email address in and then sign up. Sign up for the Monday Morning Outlook, sign up for the Data Watches, sign up for the Wesbury 101. I would also sign up for 3 on Thursday. That's our new product. It's really cool. Just 3 charts. And we pick some the great topics, and the guys do a great job putting that together. So
and never forget at Wesbury is your Twitter or now X handle.
Yeah, at Wesbury with no T in the name. And and by the way, it's all for if you sign up for our newsletter, it's free. We will never market. If I do write a book, I will market that. But other than that, you will never be marketed to.
We appreciate it, Brian.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for coming on. We love having you, and I look forward to when you and I can kick back with the Fine Tobacco product.
Yes, absolutely. Can't wait, Greg. All right, Matt, Ashley, Greg, it's great to be with you. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too, Brian.
Thanks Brian.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of The Lumber Word. The Lumber Word podcast is dedicated to engaging conversations about the lumber industry, including trading ideas, market trends, and evaluations of overvalued and undervalued assets. We wish to emphasize that the discussions and opinions expressed in this podcast are purely for informational and entertainment purposes. They should not be considered as financial or investment advice. We encourage our listeners to make their own financial decisions, taking into account their unique circumstances and financial goals, and to seek professional financial advice if necessary.